Hello and welcome back to my channel, In Search of Wonder, or welcome if it's your first time here. My name is Anne, and today is the perfect day for me to film my very in Victober video because I don't know if you can tell, it's kind of gloomy and gloomy and rainy out there. Gonna have a little ride back. Gloomy and rainy outside, chilly. There is a definite chill in the air. It's the first day of fall, and fall definitely decided to show up. And we are feeling it today. So I have my long sleeve t-shirt on, which I never wear long sleeve t-shirts. So this is a special blessing just for y'all. I even ironed it because I didn't want myself in a wrinkled t-shirt on the internet for the whole world to see. So extra blessings. So it's fall and I am on my third cup of tea today. Yes, tea. This is a spiced tea. I forget what it's called, but they sell it at IKEA of all places, and it's one of my favorite teas. Really good. This cup I got from Denmark 20 odd years ago, and I don't know, doesn't that just scream fall? I love it. So, yes, I said very in Victober because we've got a lot going on here. First of all, I'm Anne, but that's not the Anne we're talking about. We're talking about the Anne of Green Gables, Anne, who is one of my favorite literary characters, naturally. Shatona Havoc is doing an Anne-tober. So she has a whole bingo board, really pretty, for Anne-tober. Because of course, Anne is famous for saying in one of the books in this series, "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers." So I loved these prompts. I love Anne of Green Gables, and I was really excited about this readathon, reading challenge, whatever you want to call it. However, I also was very excited about Victober, which is a reading challenge based on Victorian literature, which I also love. So I decided in my very own Anne way to combine the two of them. So my goal is to read mostly Victorian or Victorian inspired literature for the month of October, using the prompts from Anne-tober. Also, I purposely picked short ones. I think, I don't think there are any longer than like 300 pages in here. Maybe there might be an odd one or two, but mostly I picked shorter selections so that I can get as many of them in as I want, because actually a lot of them I'm really interested in reading now that I have looked them up and figured them out. So anyway, let's get started. So first of all, before I start with the ones for Anne-tober, I want to get one out of the way, which is Little Dorrit. It's a year-long reading challenge that I'm doing with some friends and my sisters, and the September prompt was to read Dickens. I've already mentioned this if you see in my other videos. I am about halfway through, and I really am enjoying it. This is a long one, and it will probably take me into the beginning of October. But I'm really enjoying it and love Dickens, so this totally fits squarely into Victober. Now, by the way, Victober has several prompts. There are, I believe, 5 co-hosts, and they each have a different prompt. Plus, there is a group read that they're going to do. I'm not going to tackle the group read because it was really long, and I decided not to worry about the prompts from each of the co-hosts because I feel like the books I'm reading will fall into those prompts. Naturally, I didn't necessarily match them up. I mostly focused on matching them up with the Anne-tober prompts. This, I'm sure, fits into one of them, if nothing else, that of class, that of a stranger or outsider, which are a couple of the prompts. So, Little Dorrit, I am reading and halfway through. So, I'm going to finish that one. And then, moving on to the actual Anne-tober prompts. The very first one is Call Me Anne with an E. And also call me Anne with an E. The E is very important. Don't forget it. When I go to a coffee shop and they say, what's your name? I say Anne with an E. They don't always know where to put the E, weirdly, but anyways, Anne with an E. So we are supposed to read a book that begins with E, which was kind of tricky, especially trying to confine it to Victorian literature. But I found one, and it is on Hoopla. So the one I found for E is East Lynne by Mrs. Henry Wood. And it says, Lady Isabelle Vane married for all the wrong reasons, only to one day find her lawyer husband neglecting her for another woman. Seething with jealousy, she leaves behind her husband and their child for the flirtatious Francis Levison. It's a risk she takes willingly, but it comes with a heavy price that will lead her to the depths of despair and a quest for redemption. A classic page-turner from the sensation novel trend in England, East Lynne plays upon the Victorian fears of infidelity, promiscuity, and divorce. A tale of disaster, disguise, and adultery, it continues to surprise readers today. So, kind of gives me a little bit of Anna Karenina vibes. Anyway, so that is East Lynne, and that's the actual Victorian one. I also picked non-Victorian books for each prompt, just in case I have one of them more of a mood read, but they are all set in Victorian times, my non-Victorian books. So they still have that Victorian flavor to them. So my non-Victorian, but still sort of Victorian book that I plan to read for this challenge is a little bit of a stretch. It's John Eyre by Mimi Matthews. So I know John doesn't start with an E, but Eyre does. So it's his last name that counts, right? And obviously it's a twist on and a retelling of Jane Eyre, but with a male protagonist. And I'll read the first part of the blurb. When disgraced former schoolmaster John Eyre arrives at Thornfield Hall to take up a position as tutor to two peculiar young boys, he enters a world unlike any he's ever known. Darkness abounds, punctuated by odd bumps in the night, strange creatures on the moor, and a sinister silver mist that never seems to dissipate. And at the center of it all, John's new employer, a widow as alluring as she is mysterious. It's got the gothic flair that Bronte had, but there's also, like, I don't know if it's a magical realism or fantasy kind of vibe to it, which is outside the norm for Mimi Matthews and for me, let's be honest. So I'm curious to read that one. So that's the book that starts with E. And then the next one is Kindred Spirits. Of course, in Anne of Green Gables, she's famous for describing people as being kindred spirits if she gets along well with them or they have similar interests. So the idea here is if you liked Anne of Green Gables or a particular aspect of Anne of Green Gables, then you'll also like XYZ, some other book. So for my Victorian option, the one that I picked was Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. I have already read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and I started Through the Looking Glass actually, and I don't have much left to it, but for some reason I set it aside. I never went back to it and got busy reading other things. So I want to finish that one and it won't take me long. So for that prompt, that's an easy one. And I picked it because it has a young female protagonist, just like Anne of Green Gables, and is on her own in this story. I'm not sure that she's actually orphaned or anything. I don't think that's even implied, right? Like, I don't remember feeling that, but she's definitely acting very independently in these stories. Like, there's no parental oversight going on here, right? Anyway, so I think that there are some similarities, but they're very different characters. So that's why I picked that one. And then for my non-Victorian option for that one, I found a very interesting book on Hoopla. I actually don't even know, like, did someone recommend this to me or did I just come across it when I was browsing? It came out a couple years ago and honestly does not get like raving reviews. It gets like satisfactory reviews on Goodreads. Like, you know, this was good, but it wasn't as great as what I was expecting. But I was intrigued by it, by the title and the cover and the sound of it. And it's definitely set in Victorian times. So, did I say the title yet? I don't know. It's called Heed the Wind. So, let me just read the first part of the blurb. She lost her entire family. He destroyed his. Now the battle for redemption begins. Dun, dun, dun. And the reason why I chose this one is because this is an 18-year-old female protagonist who is alone in the world. And she's coming from a rough past, and she has to find a way to move forward and survive in the situation that life has given to her, similar to Anne of Green Gables at the beginning of her story. So that is why I picked that one. Plus, it's set in Victorian London, and it has a really pretty cover. So that is for that prompt. Then the next prompt is, I suppose it was a romantic way to perish for a mouse. So in this one, the prompt is that someone must die in the story, which honestly isn't that hard to do because, like, it happens in books. My first one is going to be Sherlock Holmes, which I think I may have read one Sherlock Holmes. I know, don't shoot me, okay? Don't excommunicate me from the booktube community, but I may have read one Sherlock Holmes in my life, and that's it. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, but I'll fix it in October and I'll read another one, or maybe more. So, and these I'm gonna read from Hoopla, the library app, because I don't have a hard copy, and I don't know which one I'm going to read. Probably whichever book I borrow and I open it up, and the first one, I'm going to read that. Probably. We'll see. Anyways, I'm going to read something by Sherlock Holmes because I think that somebody dies in a lot of them. So, and if somebody doesn't die in the first one I read, then I'll read another one. Okay. The next one will be A Dark Night's Work by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I think it's just a short, like a novella. It's not a full length. The library copy is 190 pages, the digital version. So it says, a country lawyer, Edward Wilkins, has an artistic and literary personality, unsuited to his social position as the son of a successful lawyer who takes over his father's practice in the provincial town of Hamley. His legal representation of the local gentry and nobility leads him to try fitting into their social circles, only to be mocked and treated with derision. He develops a drinking problem and spends more money than he can afford to in his attempts to be an equal to his clients. I hope it has a happier ending, sounding kind of grim with that description. But then again, the title is A Dark Night's Work. So I have a feeling that things go down in this story. And also I am told that someone dies, which is why I picked it. So, and I don't think it's very pleasant how they die. So that's my other Victorian option. I will read either that. I will read Sherlock Holmes first. If I have time, I really want to get to this one. I'm intrigued by this shorter novel by her, and I'm interested. I like Elizabeth Gaskell. She's one of my favorites. So the other one, the non-Victorian one, actually I'm super interested in reading. And it is called The Five. And you may ask, who are the five? Well, my dear, the five are the victims of Jack the Ripper. Yes, the serial killer who terrorized Victorian London, the very same one. This is a nonfiction book about his 5 victims. Super creepy, but I find that I am fascinated by this, mostly because I read an article about an American female serial murderer whose name I do not remember at the moment, who was at one point actually accused of being Jack the Ripper because she kind of, when she was in jail for the murders that they know she committed in the States, she was boasting about things, about the crimes that Jack the Ripper committed, and she seemed to have inside information about them. And some of her victims here in the States, she had done things similar to what Jack the Ripper had done, gruesome things. And so the guy who was the policeman who was investigating, the detective who was investigating her, was like, but they never connected her to them. She was mysteriously gone somewhere during that time frame. Like, she wasn't accounted for here in the United States. Theoretically, she could have had time to go across to London and then come back. But why? There doesn't seem to be a motive. And the things, like, facts don't line up. And people nowadays think, like, she doesn't really make it to the list of viable suspects for Jack the Ripper. So she's probably not. But reading about her just got me kind of curious. And I also watched Bailey Sarian's videos on, which I don't know if you have ever seen her YouTube channel. That's a fun one where she talks about real crime and murder mysteries and the like while she does her makeup. And she's just very engaging the way she tells these stories, which are very often grim and gruesome. So it's a strange combination, but it totally works. Anyway, in her episode of Jack the Ripper, someone mentioned this book, The Five. And so I went and looked it up and immediately put it on my TBR because, I don't know, it's intriguing. I'm interested to find out what was going on there. So that is for that prompt, someone dies. And then the next one is from the quote, I love a book that makes me cry. So obviously that's what we're going to get here. A book that makes us cry, a tearjerker. And I have several options for this. I'm only going to give to one of them. And these are two longer ones. So I may or may not get to these ones actually. We'll see. If I don't read one of the full-length novels, I do have a short option, The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde, which may be a little bit of a cheat. I don't think so. It's a fairy tale, I think, by Oscar Wilde. A short story. I think a children's story. It was intended to be a children's story, and apparently it makes many people cry. So that is one. There are two novels that I do want to read at some point. Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, which I have a love-hate relationship with that guy. So I don't know. But the other one is Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I have already mentioned. I love Elizabeth Gaskell. I have to read two more of her full-length novels to have read her entire canon. What do you call it? List of books she wrote. Full-length novels. Her whole list. I've read most of them. But I've not read Sylvia's Lovers or Ruth. And so Ruth is apparently a tearjerker. So I put that on the list if I have time to get to it. And then for my non-Victorian, I have one that caught my eye called Isabelle and Alexander by Rebecca Anderson. It's just a typical romance novel, just a fun read. And it's set in Victorian times, but I have read from the reviews and other people that it's a bit of a tearjerker because the guy is, I don't think, okay, so Isabelle and Alexander get married, and I don't think he's disabled before they get married. I think he becomes disabled, completely disabled after they're married. And so then it's like, you know, navigating that whole new scenario of their relationship, which I find it to be a very interesting setup for a romance novel. So I'm really interested to read that. I've put that on my TBR ever since I came across it a year or two ago, but I haven't actually read it yet. So that made it to my list here. All right. The next prompt is, there's only part of the quote here, graveyard of buried hopes. I think the whole quote is something like, life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes. A very dismal thought. But the prompt is to read a spooky book, appropriate for October. So I have multiple options. For my Victorian ones, I have a poem by Christina Rosetti, Goblin, Marque, which I've heard really good things about. I think it was Kate Howe was the one who was describing it, and she really loves that one and recommended that one as as an option for Victober. So I kind of want to read that one. And then the other one is The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde, which I like his plays, but I've never read anything else by him. So we'll see. That could be interesting. The Canterville Ghost. Again, I think it's a short one, so that's good. For non-Victorian options, I picked 2 books that, interestingly, have the word lost in the title. So we've got a theme going here. The first one is Lost in Darkness by Michelle Griep, which I actually own on Kindle. So this one, what I love about it is it's inspired by Frankenstein, which I've also never read. Don't tell anybody. But, I mean, I know, like, the basic idea of the story, and I'll read it someday. Like, it's on that list of books I'm gonna get to for sure one day. It may be when I come back as a ghost from the afterlife, but one day I'll read it. Anyway, this one is, I mean, of course, I could actually read the actual Frankenstein for Victober, and that's totally an option, actually. But for a mood read, this one is on my Kindle. I already own it. So anyway, the blurb says, travel writer Amelia Balfour's dream of touring Egypt is halted when she receives news of a revolutionary new surgery for her grotesquely disfigured brother. This could change everything, and it does, in the worst possible way. So that one is an option. And then we have The Lost Melody by Joanna David Politano, who is one of my favorite authors. And I have not read all of her books, and one that I have not read yet is The Lost Melody. And I have heard people talking about that on BookTube, and everybody who's talked about it really enjoyed it. So I need to get to reading that one. So unfortunately, I do not own that one, but I can borrow it through the library. And that one is also about a concert pianist, so I think that's cool. I'll read the first bit of the blurb. When concert pianist Vivian Mordaunt's father dies, he leaves to her the care of an adult ward she knew nothing about. The woman is supposedly a patient at Hurstwell Asylum. The woman's portrait is shockingly familiar to Vivian, so when the asylum claims she was never a patient there, Vivian is compelled to discover what happened to the figure she remembers from childhood dreams. Definitely giving the spooky vibes. So that one I would love to get to in October if I have time. So that is for that prompt. And then we have the next prompt. And one of my favorite quotes from Anne of Green Gables is, "Tomorrow is always fresh with no mistakes in it." Yet. But no mistakes is the prompt, and the idea is to read a book where a character gets a fresh start, which counts for a lot of books. For my Victorian option, I'm going to go with Silas Marner, which I have read, but it's been so long, I don't remember much about it at all. So I have this library copy. Oh, well, it's like a, what is it called? Discard? Library discard? Anyway, the library got rid of it. I bought it at a library book sale. So I have this copy of Silas Marner, which I am looking forward to reading. And then for my non-Victorian one, a book that I've had on my Kindle queue for a long time and haven't just gotten to it yet, is The Barrister and the Letter of Marque by Todd M. Johnson, which just looks and sounds like an interesting story. So the fresh start part of the story comes in. Well, let's read the blurb here. As a barrister in 1818 London, well, I guess that's a little bit before Victorian times, William Snopes has witnessed firsthand the danger of only the wealthy having their voices heard, and he's a strong advocate who defends the poorer classes against the powerful. That changes the day a struggling heiress, Lady Madeline Jameson, arrives at his door. In a last-ditch effort to save her faltering estate, Lady Jameson invested in a merchant brig, the Paget. The ship was granted a rare privilege by the King's Regent, a letter of marque authorizing the captain to seize the cargo of French traders operating illegally in the Indian Sea. Yet, when the Paget returns to London, her crew is met by soldiers ready to take possession of their goods and arrest the captain for piracy. And the letter, the sole proof his actions were legal, has mysteriously vanished. Moved by the lady's distress, intrigued by the letter, and goaded by an opposing solicitor, Snopes takes the case. But as he delves deeper into the mystery, he learns that the forces arrayed against Lady Jameson, and now himself, are even more perilous than he'd imagined. So she is trying to save her faltering estate, so that's her fresh start. Unfortunately, her fresh start doesn't pan out the way she wants, so that's where the story comes in. And also, it's not technically Victorian, I guess. What did Victorian start? 1837? Is that the year? 1830s? So 1818 is a little early, but, you know, I mean, who's counting? The next prompt, the quote, or part of the quote, is "When your imaginations come true," which I actually don't know what part of the book that is. But anyways, the idea is to read, the prompt is to read a fantasy or sci-fi book. So I am actually already got that started. I am currently reading Fantasties by George MacDonald, and I'm about a quarter of the way through there and enjoying it. I don't know what the heck is going on, but I mean, it's interesting. So this young guy is finds himself in a fairy world the day after he turns 21, and he's just experiencing life in the fairy world, which is obviously quite fantastical. And so far, he has met 3 women, and none of them are like actual human women. Okay, no, he did meet a human girl, like an actual human girl, but he did not instantly fall in love with her. But 3 other womanish figures he has met in this fairy world. The first is apparently his 237-year-old grandmother, and the second was a tree, and the third was a statue that he brought to life by singing. And he instantly fell in love. Well, I don't know about, okay, fell in love is strong. He was instantly attracted to all 3 of these women. And the first one was like, no, I'm your grandmother, so no, you can't do that. And then the next one was a tree. And so fairies are only like alive and active at night. So, and he was like, she rescued him from the mean ash tree. And so she held him in her arms, the branches, I guess, like all night long. And he just like was really in love with her. And then that kind of faded when he discovered a statue of a woman that he was able to release from her statue by singing, and she came to life. And so he's really in love with her. But at the same time, he senses that there is something cold and sinister in her. I mean, she was a statue. So that doesn't stop him from being very attracted to her. So, I mean, I guess it might be typical for a 21-year-old guy. We'll see what happens as the story goes on. Next, we have another option. So when I finish with this one, I kind of want to read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Just curious about that one. and have never read it, and it fits the prompt. So, and it's Victorian, so I might get to that one. And my non-Victorian option is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is a very intriguing concept set in Victorian times. So then that brings us to the last Antober prompt, which is life is worth living as long as there's a laugh in it. So the idea is to read a comedy. My Victorian option is 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. It's the same name twice. And apparently this book is really funny. It's actually been on my mental TBR for a long time, so I would like to get to that one, and I think it's also not very long. The other one, my non-Victorian option, is The Gentleman and the Thief by Sarah M. Eden, which I read the first one in the series several years ago, and it was fun. It was about authors of Penny Dreadfuls, which is a fun twist, and so you get kind of like a story within a story kind of thing going on in all the books in the series. I think it will be a fun read, and apparently, according to reviewers, the dialogue is very witty and funny, and kind of like a bit of a rom-com with a mystery in there. So those are all the prompts for Antober, and I have a few other challenges that I keep up, year-long challenges that I keep up. So I included these on my TBR. Some of them are not necessarily Victorian. So the next one is the What the Dickens Facebook book club. Can't say that ever. And they are reading, and this is a very short one, The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, which if you watched my recent haul and unhaul video, you know that I got this lovely edition of all of Edgar Allan Poe's works. So, and obviously The Raven is in here. So I've read it before, but it's been a long time. So I am looking forward to reading it again, and October is a good time to do that. And so that's for the What the Dickens challenge. Then the next one, the Read Your Shelf challenge with Chantal Reads All Day. I need a book that starts with G. I forget why. Oh, because it was the last name of the author of the book that I read in September. And the author of the book I read in September was Michelle Griep. So this one needs to start with G. And I could not find any Victorian options that were also already on my shelf, which is kind of the point of the challenge, is to read books you own but haven't read yet. So this one I'm going with is not a Victorian option or by a Victorian author or anything, Victorian setting, whatever. This is Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. Marilyn Robinson, yes. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize, so should be pretty good. I've heard many wonderful things about it. I have never read it. I've had it on my shelf for a year or two, and so in October, hopefully I get to it. It says, Marilyn Robinson returns with a story about fathers and sons and the spiritual battles that still rage in America's heart. In the luminous and unforgettable voice of Congregationalist minister John Ames, Gilead reveals the human condition and manages to convey the miracle of existence itself. So, seems like a heartwarming kind of read. And for my own personal challenge that I made for myself this year, I made a non-fiction challenge. And this book is not actually one that's specified in the challenge, but I can add non-fiction books to it throughout the year. And that is How to Be a Victorian, which is on my Kindle. And then finally, for the Read Your Classics challenge for October, which is the same challenge I'm reading Little Dorrit for in September, the challenge is to read a classic nonfiction book, which I got a little stuck on that. I was looking up nonfiction books from the Victorian era by British authors, and they either seemed like really long or really technical or lots and lots of political ones. or science ones, and I was not really feeling up to that particular challenge. And then someone mentioned that at least in past years, some people have read books by Charles Haddon Spurgeon for Victober, and I was like, yes, love Charles Spurgeon. I've read some of his sermons. I've read another one of his books or two. Yes, definitely. I have wanted to go to his church. I mean, well, he's not the pastor there anymore, but there's still a church there in London that he pastored for many years. And I've been to London like 3 or 4 times, but I've just never been able to, like, the timing has not worked because it's kind of like away from everywhere we have stayed. And I really want to go. It's like one of my bucket list things. I haven't done it yet. But anyways, I have a book by him that's been on my shelf for a while. John Plowman's Talk. And again, not a very long book. And I think, I don't know if it's sermons. It's talks. Call them talks. What's the difference between that and a sermon? I don't know. But the back says, good advice is often hard to come by. Even more rare is the plain speaking that you will find in this book by Charles Spurgeon. He is not afraid of calling a spade a shovel and describes the idle person as lazy as Ludham's dog that leaned its head against the wall to bark. Everybody. There is plenty of humor in the way Spurgeon talks and great truth behind his advice. So, obviously, this is more of a pile of possibilities than an actual prescribed TBR. I am confident I will get to most of them. Again, I picked pretty short ones, except for a couple in there that aren't quite so short. But feeling like I should be able to get to a lot of them, and I'm very excited about what October holds for me, and reading some new to me authors and some great classic books from the Victorian era or set in the Victorian era, and looking forward to it. So I am very interested to know what you are reading for October. If you have a whether it's Victober or just general October TBR, let me know in the comments so I can watch a video and see what you are up to reading this coming month. And what also I would love to know, like, what is your favorite Victorian novel, either written during Victorian times, or your favorite book set in Victorian times, if you have any recommendations for me. And for some reason my video stops here, so that's it. See you next time.